Hey guys, imagine you're squeezed into the last car of a midnight locomotive that reeks of burnt toast, stale coffee, and a hint of nostalgia, while the grizzled conductor smirks and shouts, "All aboard the Dream Express, no refunds." Feel that shiver. Before we steam ahead, smash that like button if you're ready for a bedtime adventure, and drop a comment telling us your weirdest pre-sleep ritual. Dim the lights, grab a cozy blanket or that half-eaten cookie you swear fuels your imagination, and let the glow of your screen become the first flicker of the cabin lantern. You hear the rhythmic clack-clack of wheels like a sleepy drum, feel the gentle sway coaxing your eyelids shut, and smell the faint perfume of old pine mingling with the cool night air seeping through cracked windows. It's the kind of ride that makes scrolling through TikTok feel like waiting in line for a grocery store checkout, tedious but oddly comforting. So buckle up, breathe in that vintage train scent, and tell me in the comments, if you could name this magical locomotive, what would you call it? Young Luna tossed in her cramped attic, the ceiling fan humming like a bored mosquito. Every night, the clock's hands marched past midnight while her eyes refused to surrender. She stared at the cracked plaster, wishing for a pillow made of clouds instead of the dusty mattress she called a bed. Then, as if the universe heard her mutter, "Anyone," a faint silver whistle sliced through the silence. The sound guided her to the forgotten night station, a rust-caked platform that smelled of stale popcorn and rain-soaked iron. There, under a halo of moonlight, a train glimmered like a polished mirror dropped from a galaxy-faraway boutique. Its carriages exhaled a warm, oily breath that mingled with the sweet perfume of night-blooming jasmine drifting from a nearby garden. The wheels clicked a rhythm that reminded Luna of a metronome gone rogue, each tick echoing in her chest. The train's windows flickered with colors that seemed to be made of melted crayons and whispered promises. Even the platform's cracked tiles shivered, as if the steel beast were humming a lullaby louder than a lullaby-singing cat. From the shadows stepped an enigmatic conductor, his coat stitched from midnight itself, and a hat perched like a mischievous rabbit's ears. He tipped his brim with a grin that could have sold sand in a desert, then said, "Welcome aboard, Miss Insomniac. We're headed straight for Dreamland." Luna blinked, half expecting him to pull a rabbit out of his pocket, but instead he produced a brass ticket that smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls. He waved a lantern that sputtered like a reluctant firefly, casting goofy shadows that danced like TikTok influencers on a wall. With a wink, he added, "Don't worry, we don't stop for midnight snacks, unless you count the occasional comet crumb." The conductor promised a voyage through clouds of cotton candy fog, past rivers of lullabies, and into the kingdom where pillows reign supreme. He warned that the journey might be bumpy, like riding a roller coaster designed by a sleep-deprived engineer, but the destination guaranteed a night of uninterrupted snoring. Luna felt a mix of excitement and dread, as if she were about to binge-watch an entire season of a show without the dreaded cliffhanger. The train's doors hissed open, releasing a gust of cool night air that smelled like freshly baked bread and distant fireworks. With a reluctant sigh, Luna stepped onto the platform, feeling the cold metal under her shoes like the first bite of a frozen popsicle. As the train lurched forward, Luna clutched the brass ticket, its edges tingling like static on a cat's back. The world outside blurred into streaks of silver and violet, and the rhythmic clatter sang her into a trance that felt both absurd and comforting. She glanced back at the night station, now shrinking like a bad haircut in a mirror, and whispered a thank you to the universe for finally answering her insomnia prayers. The conductor tipped his hat once more, his eyes twinkling like a sitcom laugh track, and shouted, "Next stop." "Dreamland, hold onto your blankets." Luna settled into a plush seat, the upholstery smelling of lavender and old books, ready to embark on the quest for the most glorious, uninterrupted sleep ever imagined. The night train to Dreamland hissed out of the station like a silvered serpent, its wheels clacking against rails of midnight velvet. Inside, Luna pressed her forehead to the cold, polished window, watching the world dissolve into a smear of indigo and starlight. The carriage smelled of warm cinnamon and old library dust, a comforting blend that whispered of bedtime stories long forgotten. She settled into the plush seat, feeling the gentle sway as the locomotive rolled deeper into the darkness. A soft chime announced the arrival of the whispering carriages, and Luna's heart thumped like a drum in a marching band. From the shadows emerged the dream guides, tiny sprites no taller than a thimble, their wings shimmering with the pastel hue of sunrise. They floated down the aisle, each humming a lullaby that sounded like a harp tuned by a mischievous cat. One guide named Pippa offered Luna a riddle about a moon that ate cheese, causing the girl to giggle despite the creeping chill. Another, called Bristle, sang a melody that smelled of rain on hot pavement, coaxing sleepy sighs from every passenger. Their soft-spoken words wrapped around Luna like a blanket woven from moonbeams and old sitcom punchlines. Just as Luna began to drift, a low, greasy fog slithered in through the cracks, smelling faintly of stale popcorn and forgotten homework. It coiled around the carriages like a lazy cat, muttering doubts that sounded suspiciously like a GPS recalculating route. "You'll never reach Dreamland," it hissed, its voice a mixture of a broken record and a tired school bell. The fog thickened, dimming the lanterns and making the plush seats feel as soggy cereal. Even the dream guides faltered, their wings trembling as if caught in a sudden wind tunnel. Luna clenched her tiny fists, feeling the rubbery grip of her favorite stuffed rabbit, Sir Whiskers, against her palm. She remembered the riddles the guides had whispered, each one a tiny key to unlock a locked door of fear. With a breath that tasted like peppermint tea, she shouted back at the fog, "I'm not a passenger, I'm the conductor of my own dreams." The words cracked the fog like a cracked egg, sending droplets of doubt splattering onto the floorboards with a squelchy pop. The dream guides steadied themselves, their lullabies rising like a choir of jubilant fireflies, and the carriage shivered back into motion. The train surged forward, its wheels humming a tune reminiscent of the opening riff of a classic rock anthem. Think Queen meets Bedtime Story. Luna laughed, feeling the absurdity of battling fog with a stuffed rabbit, and the carriage filled with the scent of fresh pine and victory. She glanced at the dream guides, who winked and tossed a final riddle about a dragon that prefers knitting, sealing the night with gentle irony. As the horizon glimmered with the first blush of sunrise, Luna slipped into a deep, buttery sleep, her breath sinking with the rhythmic click-clack of the rails. The whispering carriages whispered one last secret. Every journey home begins with a single, brave step onto a moving train of imagination. The night train chugged up the hill like a tired cat chasing a laser pointer, its wheels humming against the whisper-thin air. Ahead, a bridge of constellations stretched across the sky, each star a polished brass bolt that glittered with ancient promise. Luna, perched on the conductor's seat, tipped her hat to the celestial arch, feeling the cool kiss of nebula mist on her cheek. The rails sang a soft, metallic lullaby as the locomotive's nose slipped onto the starlit span. Below, the world fell away into a velvet sea of midnight, dotted with twinkling fireflies that looked suspiciously like paparazzi. Without warning, the storm of insomnia burst forth, a roiling vortex of flickering thoughts and restless sighs that rattled the bridge like a toddler shaking a soda bottle. Thunderous yawns cracked the silence, and the rails shivered under a barrage of insomnia sparks that smelled faintly of stale coffee and burnt popcorn. The train lurched, its carriages clanking as if a troop of clumsy giants were trying to do the cha-cha on a tightrope. Luna's knuckles whitened around the brass lever, her breath a puff of frost in the sudden chill. Even the constellations seemed to hiccup, their light wobbling like a bad Wi-Fi signal. Luna steeled herself, recalling the old legend that a steadfast heart can outrun any sleepless gale. She grabbed the wheel of destiny, actually a polished oak handle, and twisted it with the vigor of a gamer beating the final boss in a retro arcade. The night winds swirled around her, tossing stardust like confetti at a New Year's party, and whispered absurd riddles about socks disappearing in dryers. She answered each gust with a chuckle, shouting, "You can't keep a dreamer awake when I've got a bedtime playlist on repeat." The train steadied, its wheels finding the groove as if the bridge itself decided to give her a standing ovation. Keeping the lanterns alight became a battle of wills. Each lantern was a tiny sun, sputtering whenever a stray thought tried to snuff it out. Luna fanned the flames with a hand-crafted fan shaped like a dragon's tail, the air smelling of cinnamon and the faint ozone of a thunderstorm in a soda can. When a lantern guttered, a mischievous sprite, probably the ghost of a 90s sitcom laugh track, cackled, then floated away, leaving a puff of glittery dust. Luna swatted at the sprite with a grin, muttering, "Not today, Netflix binge." The glow returned, bathing the carriage in a warm amber that made the passengers sigh in collective relief. With the lanterns blazing, the bridge steadied, and the storm of insomnia began to dissolve like sugar in tea left out too long. Moonbeams stitched the broken rails back together, humming a lullaby that even the most hyperactive hamster could not resist. Luna guided the train across the final arch, her eyes sparkling like the opening credits of a classic adventure film. The passengers, now snug in their dream-filled bunks, whispered thanks that sounded suspiciously like the chorus of a pop song stuck in their heads. As the locomotive rolled back onto the ordinary tracks, the bridge winked out, leaving behind a faint scent of lavender and the faint echo of a distant train whistle that promised tomorrow's journey. Luna clutched the rail of the Dreamland summit like a pilgrim, gripping a weather-worn staff, her breath puffing out in frosty clouds that glittered like shattered glass. The wind sang a mournful ballad, rattling the golden leaves of the whisper trees that grew only at the peak of imagination. Below, the train's distant chug became a low hum, a lullaby that reminded her of bedtime stories told by grandmothers in smoky taverns. The air tasted of cinnamon and ozone, a sweet-sour mix that made her tongue tingle as if she'd just licked a comet. With each step, the ground beneath her seemed to pulse, echoing the rhythm of 1,000 heartbeats from forgotten heroes. At the very crest, a hulking silhouette emerged, a shadow of wakefulness, taller than a Roman colossus and twice as grumpy. Its cloak was stitched from the gray fog of Monday mornings, and it exhaled the stale scent of burnt coffee and overdue bills. The shadow's eyes glowed like traffic lights stuck on red, daring any dreamer to linger in the land of naps. It loomed, demanding Luna stay anchored in the waking world, as if it were a bouncer at a club that only served insomnia. A sudden gust carried a faint laugh, as if the universe were snickering at the absurdity of a nighttime showdown. Luna's friends, Sir Whisker the Cat Knight, a tiny dragon named Ember, and a jittery pocket watch named Tick-Tock, stepped forward with swagger that would make a 19th-century explorer blush. Sir Whisker swiped his tail, scattering stardust that smelled like fresh pine needles and old library books, while Ember puffed a tiny flame that crackled like popcorn in a microwave. Tick-Tock ticked a rhythm so catchy it reminded Luna of a retro video game boss theme, and the shadow winced as the beat vibrated through its gloom. With a wink, Luna shouted, "You can't keep us awake, buddy. This is bedtime, not a board meeting." The irony hung in the air like a mischievous sprite, and the shadow's frown turned into a reluctant smirk. Together they approached the massive golden gates, which were etched with constellations that glowed like neon signs in a midnight arcade. Luna placed her hand on the cool metal, feeling the hum of dream-woven light thrum through her fingertips, warm as fresh baked bread. With a heroic pull, the gates swung open, spilling out a cascade of luminous ribbons that smelled of rain on hot pavement and sweet vanilla frosting. The light swirled around the shadow, wrapping it in a soft, buttery glow that made the gloom melt like butter on a pancake. As the gates fully yielded, the summit resonated with a choir of sighs, giggles, and the faint echo of a distant train whistle. The golden light poured over Luna and her companions, lifting them onto a cloud of silken dreams that felt like sinking into a giant, cozy marshmallow. The shadow of wakefulness dissolved into a puff of sleepy dust, leaving behind only the faint aroma of lavender and the distant murmur of a bedtime story. Luna laughed, her voice ringing like a brass trumpet at a medieval fair, and declared the summit officially declared a no-nap zone for the eternally awake. As the Dreamland summit faded behind them, the train to Dreamland chugged back into view, its windows flashing like fireflies guiding night owls home. With a final wink to the stars, Luna settled into her seat, ready for the next chapter of the magical bedtime journey. The silver carriage of the Dreamland Express sighs like an old cat stretching, slipping back toward the horizon where the night folds into morning. First light cracks the sky, painting it in bruised oranges and shy pinks, as if a giant watercolor set had been tipped over the heavens. The wheels hum a low lullaby, a rhythm that tickles the ears like a distant train whistle karaoke version of Choo Choo Train from a 90s cartoon. A gentle breeze sweeps through the open windows, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint, sweet perfume of night-blooming jasmine. Even the stars seem to yawn, blinking out one by one in a cosmic game of hide and seek. Luna steps onto the platform with the grace of a tired ballerina who just discovered a secret stash of espresso. Her shoes, still dusted with moon dust, leave faint, glittering footprints that melt into the dewy grass like sugar dissolving in tea. The air kisses her cheeks, cool as a cucumber slice on a summer's forehead, and she inhales the crisp, clean breath of dawn, feeling her mind unclench like a pretzel after a marathon. A chorus of crickets, now half asleep, offers a final, ironic applause for the night's performance, as if they'd just watched the finale of a Broadway show starring fireflies. And she laughs, a soft, bubbling sound that mingles with the train's fading whistle, and feels a tiny spark of mischief flicker in her chest. The platform smells of wet stone and a hint of burnt toast, perhaps a lingering echo of the night's campfire snack that went a bit too crispy. Luna brushes a stray leaf from her hair. It's damp, slick, and smells like the forest floor after a rainstorm, grounding her like a therapist's calming voice. She watches the sunrise paint the clouds with gold, each stroke shimmering like a freshly polished armor of a medieval knight, only less intimidating and more Instagram-worthy. A distant rooster, clearly auditioning for a reality TV show, crows with dramatic flair, announcing the day like a flamboyant MC at a Renaissance fair. The world feels both absurdly grand and comically ordinary, a paradox that makes her grin like a cat who just stole the last piece of fish. Luna finds a soft patch of moss, the kind that feels like a plush pillow made of nature's own velvet, and she lies down, letting the earth cradle her weary bones. The gentle thrum of the departing train becomes a white noise soundtrack, perfect for drifting into the kind of sleep that would make even a narcoleptic sloth jealous. She imagines herself as a superhero whose power is to snooze through any crisis. Think Batman, but with a blanket instead of a cape. A stray moth flutters by, its wings whispering a lullaby that sounds suspiciously like the opening bars of a classic video game theme, making her smile at the absurdity of it all. The world around her fades, leaving only the sweet, slightly metallic taste of early morning air and the promise of dreams that feel like a Netflix binge of fairy tales. When Luna finally awakens, the sun sits high like a proud monarch on a throne of clouds, casting golden spears across the meadow. She stretches, feeling as refreshed as a garden after a rainstorm, her mind clear and sparkling like a freshly polished mirror. The day greets her with the chirp of birds that sound suspiciously like a jazz trio improvising on a rooftop, and she chuckles at the irony of such a lively soundtrack after a night of serene silence. With a pocketful of moon-lit memories and a heart humming the train's lullaby, she steps forward, ready to face whatever adventures await, perhaps even a coffee that's as strong as a dragon's roar. And as the horizon swallows the last of the night's shadows, Luna knows she'll return to Dreamland's train whenever the world feels too loud, because the best journeys always begin with a sigh and end in a smile. The night air in 1889 Paris tasted of coal smoke and stale baguette crumbs, curling around the iron ribs of the Gare du Nord like a tired sigh. Lina, a fresh-out engineer with grease still in her hair, clutched a brass lantern that sputtered more than a nervous teenager's first text. She stepped onto the deserted platform, where the gaslights flickered like nervous fireflies, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper. At the far end, a grizzled conductor named Armand leaned against a rusted bench, his coat smelling of boiled cabbage and old leather. He tipped his battered hat, and the two strangers exchanged a look that said, "We're about to get more mystery than a Netflix true crime binge." Rumor had already slithered through the city's alleys, a phantom train that only materialized at the stroke of 12, its whistle a mournful wail that could make a statue weep. Armand's voice cracked like a vinyl record as he recounted the tale, describing a locomotive that glowed with an impossible amber light, like a giant firefly on steroids. Lena felt a shiver crawl up her spine, part curiosity, part dread, as the wind tugged at her coat and carried the scent of wet cobblestones and distant perfume. The platform's silence pressed in, broken only by a distant cat yowling, as if the city itself was holding its breath for the midnight show. She laughed nervously. If it's a ghost train, I hope it doesn't charge for tickets. My budget's tighter than a corset on a circus elephant. With a conspiratorial grin, Armand produced a crumpled timetable that looked like a doodle from a bored schoolboy, marking 12 o'clock with a doodle of a skull. Lina, ever the engineer, pulled out a pocket watch, its ticking a metronome that seemed to sync with the distant rumble of an unseen engine. "Let's see if the legend holds water," she declared, and the two set up a makeshift observation post using a broken carriage wheel as a perch. The night grew thicker, the fog rolling in like a bad hair day for the Seine, and a stray pigeon waddled past, cooing like a broken karaoke machine. Somewhere in the distance, a street musician tried to play La Vie en Rose on an accordion, but the notes sputtered, as if the city itself was buffering. At precisely 12, the platform shivered. A low, guttural roar rose from the darkness, vibrating the iron rails like a giant's stomach growl. A train burst through the mist, its carriages painted in a phosphorescent sheen that made the gaslights look like cheap LED strips. The scent of hot oil, burnt rubber, and a hint of cinnamon, like a bakery on fire, filled Lena's nostrils, while the whistle screamed a note that could have been a banshee auditioning for a metal band. Armand's eyes widened, reflecting the ghostly light, and he muttered, "I always wanted a cameo in Back to the Future, but this is a bit too Victorian." The locomotive screeched to a halt, doors sliding open with a sigh, revealing an empty carriage that seemed to inhale the night and exhale a chorus of distant train station announcements. Lena stepped forward, her boots crunching on the grime-slicked platform, feeling the cold metal of the carriage handle like the grip of destiny. Armand followed, muttering a prayer to Saint George, the patron saint of railway engineers, while a stray rat scurried past, dragging a piece of cheese like a tiny, greasy banner. The duo entered the phantom train, the interior humming with the low thrum of unseen engines, and the walls flickered with images of Parisian rooftops from a century ago. As the train lurched forward, vanishing into the night, Lena realized they were now part of the very rumor they'd chased, an ironic twist worthy of a sitcom finale. With a grin, she whispered to Armand, "Next time, let's investigate a haunted bakery. At least the ghosts there smell better." The night draped the rails in a shawl of thick, clinging fog, turning the moon into a shy lantern behind a veil of vapor. Lena slipped onto the Midnight Express with the grace of a cat burglar, her boots splashing through the oily puddles that glistened like spilled oil paint. Beside her, Armand adjusted his battered pocket watch, its ticking a stubborn metronome against the whispering wind. The locomotive hissed, exhaling a breath of coal smoke that smelled of burnt rubber and old secrets, while the carriage rattled like an over-caffeinated horse. The whole scene felt like a Victorian version of Back to the Future, only the DeLorean had been replaced by a soot-black iron beast. As the train lunged forward, the fog thickened, swallowing the landscape until the world became a ghostly watercolor of silhouettes. Lena squinted through the milky veil, spotting a twisted rail that jutted out like a broken tooth, a sabotage left by some unseen hand. Armand slammed the brake, the screech echoing like a banshee in a tin can, and a spray of hot, metallic steam kissed their faces. The carriage shuddered, and the scent of rust mingled with the sweet rot of wet hay, making Armand's stomach churn as if he'd just swallowed a barrel of pickles. They exchanged a look, part dread, part excitement, like two kids about to open a cursed treasure chest. Just then Victor stepped onto the platform, his top hat perched like a crown of arrogance, and his cane tapping a rhythm that mocked the train's struggle. He flashed a smile that could have sold ice to an Eskimo, then whispered that the Midnight Express was a relic destined for the Museum of Forgotten Dreams. Lena raised an eyebrow, noting that Victor's hidden agenda smelled faintly of cheap cigar smoke and ambition, a combination as appealing as a mud pie at a tea party. Armand, never missing a beat, quipped that Victor's plan to trap the spectral locomotive was the railway equivalent of trying to catch a ghost with a butterfly net. The irony was palpable. The magnate who built empires now wanted to lock a phantom train in a gilded cage. Victor's men, cloaked in soot-stained overcoats, slipped aboard like rats in a pantry, their boots clacking against the worn floorboards. They began to rig the tracks with a contraption that looked like a steampunk version of a Rubik's Cube, promising to reroute the ghost train into a dead-end tunnel forever. Lena lunged forward, her fingers finding a rusted lever and yanking it with the gusto of a pirate grabbing a treasure chest, sending a clang that reverberated through the carriage. The locomotive let out a mournful wail, its whistle sounding like a lamenting opera singer who'd lost her voice, while Armand hurled a sack of coal at the sabotaged rail, hoping the impact would be as satisfying as a perfectly timed punchline. The air grew hot, the smell of burning metal mingling with the sweet perfume of Victor's cologne, which now seemed as out of place as a unicorn at a gunfight. With the sabotage track finally giving way, the train surged forward, the wheels grinding against the rails like a drum roll before a grand reveal. Victor's grin faded into a grimace as the spectral locomotive surged ahead, its ethereal glow cutting through the fog like a neon sign advertising a haunted house. Lena and Armand exchanged a triumphant grin, their breath-forming clouds that mingled with the lingering smoke, a reminder that they had just outrun a villainous plot and a bad smell. As the Midnight Express vanished into the horizon, its whistle echoing like a distant karaoke rendition of Stairway to Heaven, the crew felt the thrill of adventure settle into their bones. And somewhere, far beyond the tracks, the ghost train whispered promises of more midnight mysteries, waiting for the next daring duo to hop aboard. The air grew thick with the smell of rust and damp earth as Mara and Jax slipped deeper into the forgotten tunnel. Their flashlights flickered like nervous fireflies, casting jittery shadows on the graffiti-scarred walls. Suddenly, Jax's boot struck something metallic, a lantern, ancient as a pirate's treasure chest, half buried in a mound of soot. It glowed with a ghostly amber, as if the night itself had been bottled inside. "Looks like we found the train's nightlight," Mara joked, but the grin faded when the lantern's light pulsed, beckoning them forward. When they lifted the lantern, the darkness peeled away to reveal a cascade of symbols etched into the rails like secret tattoos. The carvings glimmered under the lantern's glow, each line a twisted rune that whispered of roots, dates, and names long erased from official maps. Jax traced a faded star with his fingertip, feeling the cold metal bite like a reminder of forgotten promises. A sudden clatter echoed, a rat scurrying past, its tail a living brushstroke across the grime. The symbols aligned, forming a crude map of a midnight line that once ferried hope through war-torn valleys. The map told the tale of Convoy Number 7, a ragtag fleet of coal-smudged locomotives that slipped through the night to rescue refugees fleeing the front. Each carriage was packed with families clutching blankets, children clutching wooden toys, and the occasional stubborn goat that smelled like diesel and desperation. The convoy's engineer, a grizzled veteran nicknamed the Iron Whisperer, had sworn to run the line until the last ember of daylight died. As the lantern's light traced the route, the Duke could almost hear the distant wail of a whistle, a mournful note that cut through artillery fire like a sax solo in a war movie. The air grew heavy with the scent of coal smoke and stale tea, a reminder that even in darkness, humanity brewed courage. At the end of the etched story, a final promise glimmered, a vow etched in iron. We shall return when the rails sing again. The words felt like a ghostly handshake, binding the train's spirit to any who dared to listen. Mara felt a shiver crawl up her spine, half excitement, half the dread of stepping onto a stage where the audience might be a phantom conductor. Jack smirked, muttering, "So the train's got a Netflix-style cliffhanger, Season 2 anyone." Yet beneath the joke lay a solemn truth. The midnight line had been a lifeline, and its promise lingered like the smell of burnt rubber after a tire blowout. With the lantern cradled like a relic from a Spielberg adventure, they pledged to honor the convoy's forgotten heroes. They imagined the train roaring back through the tunnel, its wheels clacking like a drumline in a marching band of ghosts. The tunnel seemed to inhale, exhaling a draft of stale incense and the faint echo of a lullaby sung by mothers in the carriage. As they turned to leave, a stray cat darted across the tracks, pausing to stare at them with eyes that said, "I've seen this movie before." And so the duo stepped back into the daylight, the lantern's glow fading behind them, leaving the promise humming on the rails like a secret track on a mixtape. The night air tasted of coal dust and wet stone as the old station clock groaned toward 12. Lanterns flickered like nervous fireflies, casting jittery shadows on the cracked platform. Somewhere in the distance, a low rumble hinted at a train that had never left the timetable. Lena pressed her palm to the cold iron railing, feeling the pulse of the century-old rails beneath her fingertips. The sky above was a bruised violet, promising either a miracle or a mess of twisted metal. Lena stared at the brass lantern, its glass dome fogged with the breath of 1,000 midnight riders. She knew that a single spark could summon the phantom train, a spectral locomotive that glowed with the ghostly glow of forgotten voyages. Yet the same spark could also ignite a catastrophic collision with the freight that lumbered in the opposite direction, a hulking beast of steel and steam. With a sardonic grin, she whispered, "Well, at least if we crash, we'll finally get a good story for the history books," and lifted the lantern's wick. The decision hung in the air like a wet flag, waiting for her hand to tip the balance. Across the platform, Armand squared his shoulders and faced Victor, whose eyes glinted like polished brass buttons on a Union Jack coat. The tension crackled louder than the distant whistle, each man aware that a single word could tip the scales of destiny. Victor sneered, "You think you can rewrite history, Armand?" While Armand retorted, "I'm just here to make sure the night doesn't end in a Dickensian tragedy." Their voices rose over the clatter of a stray bucket rolling down the iron steps, echoing like a Broadway showdown set in a coal mine. The crowd, a ragtag mix of night shift workers and curious locals, held its breath like a theater audience waiting for the final act. When Lena finally ignited the lantern, a pale beam sliced through the fog, and the phantom train materialized with a sigh that sounded like a ghost humming "Stairway to Heaven." The spectral engine surged forward, its wheels humming a mournful tune that seemed to carry the souls of every passenger who ever boarded at midnight. Armand lunged forward, grappling Victor near the rail's edge, their struggle sending sparks that mingled with the lantern's glow. As the phantom train thundered past, the real freight screeched to a halt, its brakes squealing like a cat in a bathtub. In that split second, the fate of the midnight railway and the countless spirits riding its invisible tracks hung on a trembling thread of light. The dust settled and the phantom train vanished as quickly as a Snapchat story, leaving behind a lingering scent of ozone and burnt toast. Lena lowered the lantern, her heart still hammering like a drumline at a medieval fair, while Armand helped Victor to his feet, both men drenched in sweat and irony. "Next time we need a midnight rescue, we'll just call the Ghostbusters," Armand quipped, earning a begrudging chuckle from Victor. The crowd dispersed, muttering about the night's spectacle as if it were a tavern tale told over ale. And as the clock finally struck 12, the station's old wooden beams seemed to sigh, relieved that the midnight reckoning had ended without turning the rails into a twisted roller coaster of doom. The first pale fingers of dawn stretched across the horizon, pulling the night's veil from the abandoned railway. As the sun's amber breath warmed the iron, the phantom train, its ghostly whistle a memory, dissolved like a bad Wi-Fi signal. The rusted rails, once twisted by spectral hands, straightened themselves, humming a metallic sigh of relief. Birds, offended by the lingering ozone, launched a chorus that drowned out any lingering echo of the midnight engine. Lena and Armand stood on the platform, their boots still slick with midnight dew, feeling the world reset under their feet. They trudged back toward the city, the cobblestones slick with a mix of rain and the sweet rot of overripe figs from a street vendor's stall. The scent of fresh bread battled the lingering metallic tang, while lanterns sputtered out like tired fireflies, making the streets look like a retro video game level. Armand cracked a joke about the train being the original Ghost Rider, earning a snort from Lena, who swore she could still hear the phantom's brakes in her ears. The city's walls, painted with graffiti of ancient heroes, seemed to wink at them, as if saying, "Welcome home, you've survived the night shift." Their hearts hammered a rhythm that matched the clatter of carriage wheels long gone. By noon, the tail of the midnight railway had already sprouted legs, sprinting through taverns and market stalls like a gossiping squirrel. Old Mrs. Duvet, who sold herbal teas, swore the train left a faint scent of ozone and burnt popcorn, her favorite movie snack on the rails. Children gathered around a cracked stone fountain, eyes wide as the sky, demanding a reenactment that would make even the bard blush. The mayor, ever the dramatist, proclaimed the adventure a new legend, promising to carve its name onto the city's oldest stone tablet, right next to the tail of the heroic pigeon that saved the bakery. Lena and Armand listened, half amused, half horrified, at the speed with which their midnight mishap became civic folklore. Soon apprentices of the night, those daring enough to chase moonlit horizons, started training on the freshly mended track, their lanterns flickering like nervous fireflies. They whispered that the phantom train was merely a test, a cosmic audition for those who could handle the absurdity of riding a train that vanished at sunrise. In taverns, a new toast rose, to the night travelers who ride the invisible, and to the sunrise that always shows up late. The city's night markets buzzed with plans for midnight tour, complete with ghost engine, soundtracks, and optional popcorn, because why not? Even the local blacksmith forged a tiny brass whistle, marketing it as the authentic Phantom's farewell note. When the first sunrise of the season painted the rooftops gold, Lena and Armand stood on the balcony, sipping a bitter espresso that tasted like triumph and burnt sugar. They watched a new generation of night owls line up, clutching tickets that read, "One way to the unknown, no refunds." Armand nudged Lena, muttering, "If this were a Netflix series, we'd be season 2 by now." Lena laughed, noting that the only thing scarier than a phantom train was a bureaucratic timetable. With a grin, they raised their cups to the horizon, promising that as long as the night kept its secrets, the midnight railway would forever hum its mischievous tune. Twilight drapes Luminara in amber and bruised violet, casting long shadows that dance over cracked marble arches. The cobblestones smell of roasted chestnuts and river muck, a pungent reminder that even magic has its street food side. Yaren, a wiry youth with ink-stained fingertips, prowls the market stalls, eyes scanning for anything that sings of adventure. He uncovers a brittle parchment tucked behind a cracked lantern, its edges curled like old scrolls left to dry in the sun. The map hums with a faint blue glow, promising a route no mortal has ever sailed. Legend says the night vessel glides on the currents of sleep, slipping through epochs as easily as a cat sneaks through a laser pointer beam. The restless spirit of a forgotten cartographer materializes, its translucent robes rustling like old newspaper on a windy day. It whispers that the ship docks only when the moon swallows the sun, a time when even clocks get confused. Aaron feels a shiver, half excitement, half the stink of damp socks after a marathon. The spirit urges him onward, promising that the map will lead to a berth hidden behind a veil of midnight fog. Yaren rallies a motley crew, Lyra, a baker whose dough rises faster than gossip, Torin, a blacksmith with arms like wrought iron, and Pip, a mischievous sparrowfolk who thinks sarcasm is a second language. They lug crates of rope, lantern oil, and enough cheese to feed a small army of trolls. The city's night market erupts in a cacophony of clanging metal, distant lute strings, and the occasional bark of a stray dog that sounds suspiciously like a Wi-Fi router reboot. Garen jokes that they're preparing for a Netflix and sale marathon, eliciting groans and a few genuine laughs. As they load the gear, a sudden gust carries the scent of wet wool and burnt incense, hinting that something watches. The harbor lies in a cleft no cartographer's compass can chart, shrouded by cliffs that drip salty brine onto the stone like a leaky faucet. Shadows slither along the water's edge, their shapes shifting between wolves and oversized teacups, a visual pun that would make a meme lord proud. The night vessel itself looms, its hull dark as midnight coffee, deck slick with the residue of forgotten dreams. A chorus of gulls screeches, their cries echoing like a broken record, while the air tastes of iron and old perfume. Yaren steps aboard, feeling the deck's boards creak under his weight like an old theater seat about to collapse. The vessel shudders, and the currents of sleep begin to pulse, tugging at the crew's eyelids as if a cosmic alarm clock were set to snooze. Aaron watches the horizon melt into a swirl of lavender and ash, the city's lanterns flickering like fireflies on a caffeine binge. A grin spreads across his face, he never imagined his first adventure would involve dodging both literal and metaphorical ghosts. The shadows that guarded the harbor hiss, "Welcome," in a voice that sounds suspiciously like his mother, reminding him to wear a coat. With a laugh that rattles the rigging, Aaron whispers to the night, "Let's see where this dream ship drops us, maybe somewhere with better Wi-Fi." The sleepy express hissed its way into the fog of forgotten dreams, a pall of mist that clung to the rails like a damp blanket of old secrets. Myra pressed her forehead to the cold glass, watching abandoned dreams drift past like flickering lanterns left behind by weary travelers. Each lantern pulsed with a soft, mournful glow, casting shadows that whispered of bedtime stories long since swallowed by the night. The air tasted of stale milk and wilted lavender, a scent that made her stomach flip in a way that would impress any roller coaster enthusiast. Yet the train's steam sputtered, its once bright whistle now a wheezy cough, begging for the lullaby that had been stolen. Myra leapt from the carriage, her boots splashing through a shallow river of fog that smelled faintly of burnt toast and forgotten homework. She tightened her grip on the brass lantern she carried, its flame wobbling like a nervous teenager at a prom. The murky realm stretched ahead, a labyrinth of cobwebbed arches where the walls echoed with the sighs of children who never fell asleep. A sarcastic voice, half cackle, half snort, drifted from the darkness, reminding her that even the gods of nap time had a sense of humor. Undeterred, she marched forward, humming the first line of the missing lullaby to keep the dread at bay. Soon she stumbled upon a congregation of lost dreams, each one a tattered quilt of memory stitched together with sighs and giggles. A dream shaped like a dinosaur in a tutu tried to hop over a puddle of spilled cocoa, slipping and splashing chocolate onto Myra's shoes, deliciously messy. The dream keeper, a gaunt figure in a night cap that doubled as a night owl, guarded the stolen lullaby with a grin wider than the Grand Canyon. He challenged Myra to a duel of riddles, promising to hand over the song if she could answer, "What sleeps with its eyes open?" Myra answered, "A statue in a museum, because it's forever on display," and the figure burst into a fit of applause that sounded like clattering teacups. With a theatrical bow, he tossed the lullaby, a rolled parchment humming with silver notes, into her waiting hands. Myra sprinted back to the locomotive, the fog parting like a shy audience as she approached, each step echoing the rhythm of the reclaimed lullaby. She unrolled the parchment on the firebox, and the notes rose like steam, curling into the night and coaxing the engine's heart to thrum louder. The train shivered, then roared, belching clouds of fragrant pine and caramel that made the passengers' noses tingle with delight. Even the grumpy conductor, who usually looked like a sour lemon, cracked a smile and shouted, "All aboard the Dream Express." The fog of forgotten dreams thinned, revealing a sky peppered with twinkling stars that winked like mischievous toddlers. As the express surged forward, the abandoned lanterns flickered out, their jobs done, leaving behind only the soft hum of the lullaby that now powered the train's steam. Myra leaned against the carriage, feeling the vibration of the wheels as a gentle reminder that even the most tangled night can be untangled with a good tune and a dash of stubbornness. She whispered a thank you to the dinosaur to-do dream, which now pranced away, leaving a trail of cocoa-scented footprints. Passengers laughed, sharing popcorn that popped in sync with the rhythmic chug, proving that a little chaos can taste like buttered joy. And somewhere, far beyond the tracks, the fog of forgotten dreams sighed, realizing that forgetting is just another way of making room for fresh, ridiculous bedtime adventures. The sleepy express huffed its iron lungs as it lunged toward the jagged silhouette of Midnight Mountain, a peak that looked like a giant snooze button hammered into the night sky. Frost clung to the rails like powdered sugar on a donut, and the wind whispered ancient lullabies that smelled faintly of pine resin and stale coffee. Conductor Whistlewick barked orders, his voice cracking like a vinyl record stuck on a loop of Baby Shark. The carriage of sleepers swayed, their blankets puffing like clouds caught in a hurricane of yawns. Yet the mountain loomed, its icy crown promising a night so long it could make a vampire consider a day job. Suddenly a keening wail sliced through the air, the siren of restlessness perched on a crag like a diva at a karaoke bar. Her song was a discordant mash-up of alarm clocks, traffic horns, and a toddler's tantrum, each note tugging at the passenger's peace like a mischievous cat on a yarn ball. The melody seeped into the sleeper's dreams, turning sweet slumber into a jittery jigsaw of half-remembered memes and existential dread. Even the steel wheels shivered, humming in sympathy with the siren's relentless chorus. The train's once steady rhythm faltered, as if the locomotive itself were trying to tap dance to a song it despised. Zorion, the stoic night watcher with eyes like polished obsidian, grabbed a length of moon-woven rope and flung it around the carriage's windows. Myra, quick-witted and armed with a pocketful of lavender sachets, sprayed the air, hoping the scent would act like a calming app notification. Together they formed a makeshift shield, humming an old lullaby that sounded suspiciously like the theme from Friends, but in a minor key. The siren snarled, her pitch rising as she tried to pierce their improvised barrier, but the lavender's fragrance clung like Grandma's hug. Passengers began to snore in unison, producing a bass line that rivaled any heavy metal concert, much to the siren's annoyance. With the siren momentarily silenced, Orion and Myra charted a path through the icy peaks of insomnia, where snow glittered like powdered sugar on a donut. Yes, again, because who can resist that metaphor? The tracks glistened with a sheen of frost that smelled like peppermint breath after a dentist visit, sharp and oddly refreshing. They slipped past frozen stalactites that dripped slow, viscous dreams, each drop echoing like a distant snore in a library. The wind grew colder, nipping at their noses and making their ears ring like they'd just survived a rock concert in a tin can. Yet every step forward felt like turning a page in an ancient bedtime story, each footfall a soft, once upon a time, whispered to the mountain itself. As the train crested the final ridge, the siren's song fizzled out like a dying phone battery, leaving only the gentle hum of the locomotive's heart. Orion winked at Myra, noting that they'd just survived a night that would make even Gandalf need a nap. The sleepers awoke to a sunrise that painted the sky in pastel pinks and oranges, the scent of fresh pine mingling with the lingering hint of lavender. The sleepy express rolled onward, its passengers now humming a cheerful tune about coffee and croissants, while the mountain slunk back into the shadows, perhaps to rehearse its next restless solo. And somewhere far below, a lone owl hooted, "I'm not a night owl, I'm a night train," proving that even nature loves a good punchline. The snow-capped summit loomed like a tired giant, its wind howling through the rusted rails of the sleepy express. Below, the train's coal-black carriages chugged with a cough of ash, their wheels squealing against the icy stone. At the apex, a towering arch of midnight fog swirled into the shape of a gate, its iron ribs pulsing with a cold, blue light. Guarding it stood the night warden, a lanky silhouette draped in a coat stitched from sleepless shadows, eyes glowing like street lamp neon. He lifted his gauntlet, and the air thickened with the sour scent of stale coffee and forgotten alarms. Myra stepped onto the platform, her boots scuffing the frost-crusted gravel, a battered lute slung over her shoulder like a war-torn banner. She lifted her chin, and the first note of the reclaimed lullaby slipped out, a melody that smelled of warm milk and moth-eaten blankets. The tune rippled through the night, cracking the warden's veil of insomnia with the sweet insistence of a toddler demanding a bedtime story. As the chorus swelled, the gate's icy bars shivered, shedding shards that tinkled like broken glass on a kitchen floor. Even the train's steam, usually a grimy blanket of soot, turned a rosy hue, as if someone had poured a splash of sunrise into its furnace. The gate splintered under the lullaby's weight, each fragment exploding into a puff of glittering dust that smelled faintly of pine needles and old library cards. The night warden staggered back, his cloak unraveling into a cascade of yawns that floated like lazy balloons. He tried to summon a wave of relentless wakefulness, but his own voice cracked, sounding like a dial-up modem in a quiet monastery. With a theatrical sigh worthy of a Shakespearean tragedy, he lowered his gauntlet and whispered, "Fine, you win. Let the sleepers ride." The gate's hinges creaked open, releasing a gust of cool night air that tasted of peppermint and overdue homework. The sleepy express inhaled the night's fresh breath, its pistons pumping like a heart that had just been revived with espresso. Steam billowed from the chimney in flamboyant curls, smelling of burnt sugar and the faint afterglow of campfire marshmallows. Carriages rattled with renewed vigor, the once groggy passengers snapping awake as if a giant hand had slapped them with a wet towel. The tracks glowed amber under the train's surge, each rail humming a low, satisfied hum reminiscent of a cat purring on a windowsill. Even the moon, that perennial night shift manager, winked approvingly, casting silver ribbons across the speeding silhouettes. As the express thundered past the summit, the night warden slumped onto a nearby boulder, scrolling through his ancient tablet like a disgruntled teenager checking tick-tock for how to stay awake. He muttered, "Great, now I have to binge-watch the sunrise," and the wind carried his complaint away like a stale popcorn kernel. Myra laughed, her voice echoing through the valleys, and tossed a spare blanket over the warden's shoulders, a piece offering as cozy as a Netflix binge on a rainy Sunday. The train's whistle blew a triumphant note, sounding oddly like the opening theme of an 80s space opera, reminding everyone that even legends love a good remix. And so the last sleeper's gate fell behind them, a relic of perpetual insomnia turned souvenir, while the sleepy express roared toward tomorrow's dreams. When the first amber ribbon of sunrise slipped over the hills, the town of Drowsy Hollow awoke to a chorus of yawns turned into giggles. The children, still draped in the soft glow of dream dust, stretched like cat-nap kittens, their hair smelling faintly of vanilla and stale popcorn from the night's adventures. Orion, the silver-haired conductor of the sleepy express, stood on the platform with a grin wider than a canyon, his boots still dusted with the soot of 1,000 bedtime stories. He tipped his battered cap to the cheering crowd, letting the steam of the train hiss like a dragon clearing its throat. The air crackled with the sweet, metallic perfume of freshly oiled gears and the faint, lingering scent of bedtime tea. Myra, now clutching the glowing torch of dream weaving, stepped forward, her eyes flickering like fireflies caught in a jar of moonlight. "Your turn to steer the night," Orion boomed, his voice echoing like a vintage radio announcer announcing a superhero landing. She laughed, a sound that sounded suspiciously like a mixtape of squeaky toys and distant fireworks, and promised to stitch new fantasies for the sleepless. Orion's farewell was part ceremony, part sitcom. He handed her a pocket watch that ticked to the rhythm of snoring, then pretended to trip over a stray cobweb, landing in a heap of fluffy clouds. The crowd roared, half in applause, half in bewildered awe, as Myra raised the torch high, its flame dancing like a TikTok trend gone viral. With a mighty chug, the sleepy express sighed and began its slow retreat, its wheels grinding against the rust-kissed rails with a grumble that sounded like an old man's belly after too much bean soup. The train's carriage doors clanged shut, sealing in the lingering scent of warm blankets, damp pine, and the occasional whiff of a child's forgotten cheese sandwich. Steam puffed out in lazy spirals, painting the morning air with ghostly ribbons that smelled faintly of burnt caramel and engine oil, an oddly comforting perfume for any night owl. As the locomotive disappeared into the mist, its horn blew a low, mournful note that reminded everyone of a distant dinosaur roar, absurdly majestic for a bedtime train. The townsfolk waved, their hands smeared with the golden dust of sunrise, feeling the bittersweet tug of departure like a well-timed plot twist in a binge-watched series. The hidden depot lay tucked beneath a hill of forgotten lullabies, its entrance concealed behind a curtain of ivy that whispered ancient lullaby lyrics when the wind blew. Inside, the cavern glowed with phosphorescent moss, casting a greenish hue over rows of silent carriages that smelled of mothballs, old leather, and the faint tang of burnt toast from a long-ago breakfast on board. Orion slipped into the shadows, his boots echoing like a tap dance on a wooden floor, and gave a conspiratorial wink to a portrait of a grizzled conductor who looked suspiciously like a younger Dumbledore with a railroad hat. The depot's walls were lined with maps of dreamscapes, each pin marking a night's adventure. One depicted a dragon made of marshmallows, another a city built entirely of Lego bricks. A mischievous rat, wearing a tiny conductor's badge, scurried past, dragging a crumb of midnight pizza, reminding everyone that even legendary trains have to deal with the occasional cheesy mess. As the sun climbed higher, the sleepy express settled into its secret cradle, its pistons humming a lullaby that promised countless future voyages. Myra, torch alight, whispered a vow to the sleeping rails. "We'll ride the night again, and this time we'll bring the popcorn." Orion, now a ghostly legend in the town's bedtime folklore, vanished like a Wi-Fi signal in a basement, leaving behind a trail of sparkling dust that kids would later claim was glitter from a superhero's cape. The townsfolk returned to their homes, their hearts warm, their bellies full of the lingering taste of toasted marshmallows and the faint metallic tang of adventure. And somewhere, deep beneath the earth, the sleepy express waited, its engine purring like a cat ready to pounce on the next dream-filled horizon. In the amber dawn of Luminara, the kingdom that still smelled of spiced incense and horse sweat, a lanky youth named Aaron shuffled through the royal archives with a quill that squeaked like a mouse in a tin can. He was a scribe, not a hero, and his greatest ambition was to perfect the art of marginalia without spilling ink on the king's prized scrolls. One rain-slick afternoon, while chasing a stray parchment that had slipped into the cellar, Aaron tripped over a moss-covered stone that thumped like a drumbeat in a forgotten song. The stone swung aside to reveal a doorway veiled in whispering shadows, as if the wall itself were breathing. The air beyond hummed with a metallic sigh, inviting the curious and the careless alike. Inside, rows of chariots stretched like skeletal snakes, their frames forged from moon silver that glimmered with the cold chill of a nighttime lake. The wheels were spindles of dream-woven silk, shimmering in colors that shifted whenever a moth dared to flutter close, casting prismatic dust that smelled faintly of burnt caramel and old library books. Each seat was upholstered with feathers harvested from phoenixes that had retired early, giving off a faint, spicy perfume of incense and ozone. When Aaron brushed his fingertips against the polished handles, a low hum resonated, like a choir of distant cicadas trapped in a glass jar. The chariot seemed to whisper, "Ready when you are," in a tone that was half invitation, half sarcastic British sitcom narrator. A cracked vellum scroll lay at the far end, its ink still wet with prophecy. When the sky bleeds midnight and the moon forgets its shine, a scribe shall bind the dream chariot and ride the veils of time to halt the looming darkness. Aaron snorted, picturing himself as a reluctant superhero, cape fluttering behind a moon-silver carriage, while the kingdom's council argued over whether the darkness was a metaphor for budget cuts. Yet the words glowed faintly, pulsing like a faulty neon sign, and the scent of ozone grew stronger, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The prophecy hinted that only a heart unburdened by ambition could steer the chariot, a twist that made Aaron wonder if the gods were playing a cosmic joke. He felt a shiver crawl up his spine, equal parts excitement, and the kind of dread you get before stepping on a Lego brick barefoot. Summoning a courage that tasted like bitter tea, Aaron slipped onto the nearest chariot, its seat warm as a freshly baked loaf and oddly comfortable, like sitting on a cloud that had just finished a marathon. He grasped the silver reins, which tingled like static on a winter's day, and whispered a half-hearted, "Hold my beer," to the empty stable. The chariot's silk wheels spun up with a whirring sound reminiscent of a vintage arcade machine, and the moon-silver frame sang a low, resonant note that vibrated through his bones. In a flash of silver light and a smell of ozone mixed with wet earth, the stable dissolved, and Aaron felt the world tilt as if he were on a roller coaster that had lost its brakes. He gasped, half laughing, half crying, as the horizon stretched into a tapestry of past battles, forgotten festivals, and the faint echo of a distant saxophone solo. When the chariot finally settled, Aaron found himself perched on the edge of a twilight river that flowed with liquid starlight, its banks lined with wilted lilies that still exhaled the scent of old parchment. He realized the darkness the prophecy warned of was not a looming monster, but a creeping apathy that threatened to mute the kingdom's stories forever. With a grin that cracked like cracked pottery, he shouted, "Time to rewrite the ending," and steered the dream chariot toward the swirling vortex of time, feeling the wind slap his cheeks like an over-enthusiastic fan. The journey ahead promised riddles, relics, and perhaps a cameo from a bewildered Greek philosopher who kept asking for Wi-Fi. As the chariot vanished into the veils, the stable's stones settled back into place, humming a quiet lullaby that promised Aaron's return if he survived the inevitable plot twists. Aaron stepped onto the dream chariot as if he were boarding a rickety school bus bound for the afterlife, his heart thumping like a war drum in a forgotten empire. Selene, the charioteer with moon-lit hair and a grin that hinted at mischief, whispered, "Hold tight, kid, the past doesn't like being tickled." The wheels of the chariot sang a low, metallic hum, echoing through the night sky like a cosmic freight train. A gust of ancient incense, spice, sandalwood, and a hint of rusted armor battered Aaron's nostrils, promising that history's smells never change. As the horizon folded into a vortex of starlight, Aaron felt both exhilarated and terrified, like a gamer stepping into a boss fight without a save point. The chariot slammed into the mouth of the labyrinth of echoes, a maze of towering stone arches that dripped with sweat-slick moss and the faint odor of mildew. Each corridor pulsed with ghostly whispers, the fragmented syllables of long-dead emperors arguing over lost taxes and broken love letters. Aaron's boots slapped against the cold flagstones, sending up clouds of dust that glittered like powdered sugar on a pastry. Shadows flickered, forming silhouettes of charioteers, soldiers, and a bewildered dinosaur. Yes, a T-Rex, because even the past loves a good cameo. Selene's voice crackled through the wind. "Remember, the walls listen. They love gossip as much as you do." Every twist forced Aaron to confront a memory that wasn't his own. The taste of copper from a Roman legionnaire's broken sword, the ache of a Maya priestess watching her temple crumble under a rain of fire. The labyrinth's echo turned these visions into riddles, demanding that he name his deepest fear, failure, or worse, becoming a footnote in a dusty chronicle. He stumbled over a pool of stagnant water that smelled of old cheese and regret, splashing it onto his shoes and feeling the cold bite his skin. With each correct answer, the stone walls glowed a soft amber, like a stage light approving a performance. Each mistake sent a sharp, metallic clang that rattled his teeth. The irony was delicious. The very history he sought to explore kept reminding him that he was just another tourist with a bad sense of direction. As Aaron pressed deeper, the labyrinth revealed its true cost, threads of time frayed like old rope, each tug pulling at the fabric of reality. He watched a bronze statue of a forgotten king dissolve into a puddle of molten gold, the scent of burning metal filling his lungs, a reminder that meddling with the past can scorch the present. Selene chuckled. "You can't rewrite the past without getting ink on your hands, or in this case, soot on your soul." A sudden gust of scorching sand from an ancient desert storm blew through, making Aaron cough up gritty memories of caravans and camel dung. The humor in the situation was as thin as the parchment maps they were following, if the maps were drawn by a mischievous cat with a penchant for doodling dragons. Emerging from the labyrinth, Aaron found himself back on the chariot, his hair slick with sweat and his mind buzzing like a hive of restless bees. Selene gave him a wink. "You survived the trial, but remember, the celestial path is a marathon, not a sprint. Think of it as a Lord of the Rings road trip with fewer hobbits and more paperwork." The chariot's wheels lifted, and the world below blurred into a tapestry of gold, ash, and the faint echo of a distant choir humming an off-key hymn. Aaron felt a strange mix of triumph and humility, as if he'd just finished a marathon and realized his shoes were made of spaghetti. He laughed, realizing that the only thing more terrifying than confronting history's ghosts was realizing he'd forgotten to bring a snack for the ride. The rift yawned like a cracked hourglass, spilling amber light onto the crumbling marble of the forgotten palace. Aaron's boots crunched on dust that smelled of stale incense and burnt rosemary, while Selene's cloak brushed against phantom banners, flapping in a wind that carried distant war drums. The air vibrated with a low hum, as if the universe itself were humming the opening bars of a forgotten battle hymn. A stray gust tossed a wilted laurel wreath into Aaron's face, making him sputter like a dragon who just ate a lemon. Even the shadows seemed to whisper, "Welcome to the ultimate history channel, no commercials, just endless reruns." From the shimmer emerged a procession of spectral monarchs, each draped in regalia that glittered like spilled stardust. King Midas, still clutching his cursed golden chalice, sneered at a ghostly pharaoh whose headdress rattled like a maraca in a desert wind. Their voices clashed, one boomed like a war horn, the other hissed like a cat on a hot tin roof, creating a cacophony that made Selene's ears ring. Aaron tried to intervene, only to be brushed aside by a phantom knight who shouted, "Back off, modern tourist, this is my Netflix binge." The spirits swirled, their armor clanking and their spectral swords sparking, turning the rift into a chaotic ballroom of bygone egos. Allegiances shifted faster than a magician's sleight of hand. Yesterday's allies became tomorrow's adversaries with a flick of a crown. The Viking chieftain, who had just toasted a mead bowl, suddenly lunged at the Roman centurion, accusing him of stealing his thunder. Literally, a thunderbolt crackled from the centurion's shield. Selene ducked behind a broken column, feeling the heat of a flaming spear brush past her cheek like a hot sauce commercial. Aaron, ever the improv hero, shouted, "Hold my enchanted map," and tossed a glowing parchment that morphed into a glowing billboard advertising a modern pizza joint, confusing the ancient warriors for a moment. The rift pulsed, its colors flickering between sepia and neon, as if the universe were flipping channels between a documentary and a sitcom. Every step forward felt like walking on a treadmill made of broken timelines, each stride threatening to yank them into a looping reenactment of the Battle of Thermopylae. The scent of rusted iron and stale sweat grew thicker, making Selene gag as if she just inhaled a dragon's bad breath. Aaron's heart hammered like a war drum, and he could hear his own pulse echoing against the distant clash of swords. With a quick grin, he grabbed a phantom banner, spun it like a baton, and used it to swing past a charging ghostly war elephant that reeked of mud and ancient perfume. Selene, clutching a glowing amulet, whispered a rhyme that turned the rift's echo into a soothing lullaby, buying them a precious few seconds to slip through the crack before the endless parade could swallow them whole. Emerging on the other side, the duo found themselves on a quiet terrace overlooking a sunrise that painted the sky in colors no ancient king could have imagined. The rift behind them throbbed like a dying star, its roar fading into a distant, almost polite sigh. Aaron laughed, wiping a smear of spectral dust from his cheek, and declared, "We survived a royal reality show without getting voted off." Selene smiled, her eyes reflecting the golden light, and replied, "And we learned that even the most powerful kings can't hold onto a timeline the way you can't hold onto a cat that refuses to be petted." Together they stepped forward, their boots leaving fresh prints in the sand, ready to chase the next dream chariot that dared to race through history's wildest highways. In the bruised belly of the rift, where the air smelled like burnt amber and ancient rust, Aaron stood toe-to-toe with the Shadow Rider, a guardian turned rogue with a grin as jagged as broken glass. The ground beneath them throbbed with a low, metallic hum, like a dying engine trying to start. Shadows curled around the rider's obsidian armor, whispering promises of dominion over the dream chariots. Yaren's heart hammered a war drum rhythm, his breath a frosty plume in the chill that seemed to seep from the very stones. He could almost hear the distant echo of his ancestors shouting, "Don't mess this up, kid." The shadow rider lunged, his blade slicing the air with a hiss that sounded suspiciously like a cat's angry meow. Sparks erupted as steel met the shimmering ether of the rift, scattering golden dust that smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books. Yaren dodged, feeling the sting of a stray ember kiss his cheek, and retaliated with a swing that sent a ripple of violet light rippling through the darkness. The clash rang out like 1,000 clashing cymbals, each strike reverberating through Yaren's bones and making his teeth chatter. Somewhere in the chaos, a lone bat screeched, as if auditioning for a horror movie soundtrack. Summoning the true power of his lineage wasn't a quiet meditation. It was more like pulling a stubborn, ancient family heirloom out of a dusty attic while the whole house shakes. Yaren's blood ignited with the warm glow of his forebears' triumphs, a sensation akin to sipping hot cocoa after a snowball fight. He felt the weight of 1,000 stories settle on his shoulders, each one humming like an over-excited choir of medieval minstrels. With a guttural shout that could rival a rock star's encore, he unleashed a torrent of luminous energy that painted the rift in shades of sunrise. The shadow rider recoiled, his armor sputtering like a malfunctioning robot in a 90s sitcom. The dream chariots, dormant for centuries, awoke with a thunderous clatter of wheels on stone, their polished bronze gleaming like a freshly minted coin. As they rolled forward, the scent of ozone and fresh rain filled the air, making Yaren's nostrils tingle with the promise of renewal. The shadow rider, now a trembling silhouette, tried to seize the reins, but the chariots had their own agenda, spitting out bolts of light that sizzled against his dark cloak. Ironically, the rider's own shadow turned against him, slipping like a banana peel on a polished floor. With a final, dramatic flourish, Yaren drove a spear of pure lineage fire into the heart of the rift, sending the shadow rider spiraling into a vortex of his own making. When the vortex closed, the rift exhaled a sigh of relief, the air clearing to reveal a sky painted with the soft pastel hues of dawn, like a watercolor masterpiece that even Bob Ross would envy. The dream chariots settled into a gentle hum, their wheels turning slowly as if strolling through a park on a lazy Sunday. Yaren stood amidst the lingering scent of burnt incense and fresh pine, feeling the world right itself around his feet. He laughed half in triumph, half in disbelief, thinking, well, that was more dramatic than the season finale of any streaming series. With balance restored, the ancient songs rose once more, echoing through the rift and promising that the next chapter would be just as wild. Yaren burst through Luminara's marble gates like a hero on a caffeine binge, his cloak billowing behind him as the moon's silver steeds pranced in the courtyard. The city smelled of fresh baked rye and a faint, metallic tang from the lingering shadow rider's ash. Lanterns flickered, casting amber halos that made the stone walls look like they'd been polished by a giant's toothbrush. Children stopped their games, eyes wide, as the dream chariot's hooves sang a low, resonant hum that rattled the market stalls. Even the grizzled tavern keeper cracked a grin, muttering that the night finally felt less like a bad horror sequel. Now the dream chariots were tethered to Luminara, not as wild steeds but as vigilant guardians, their silver manes shimmering like spilled moonlight on a lake. They paced the city walls with the solemnity of a royal guard and the swagger of a rock star on tour, occasionally tossing a mischievous snort of stardust at passers-by. Their eyes glowed a soft teal, scanning for trouble the way a security camera watches a mall, except they actually cared about the merchandise. When a stray goat tried to hitch a ride, the chariot nudged it aside with a gentle yet firm nudge that smelled faintly of ozone and burnt caramel. The townsfolk whispered that the chariots were the only thing keeping the kingdom from becoming a real-life Game of Thrones episode. Aaron settled at the grand scriptorium, ink pot bubbling with midnight lotus extract, and began to etch his odyssey onto vellum as if he were posting a centuries-long Instagram story. He chronicled the clash with the Shadow Rider, the taste of iron on his tongue, and the way the chariot's hooves cracked the cobblestones like a drum solo. Each line dripped with the urgency of a live stream, promising that future generations would not forget the fragile tether between dreaming and history. He added a doodle of a chariot wearing sunglasses, captioned "When you're too cool for nightmares," to remind readers that even legends need a laugh. By the time the ink dried, the scroll smelled of pine resin, sweat, and a hint of burnt popcorn from the nearby festival. Under the watchful glow of the moon-silver steeds, Luminara blossomed like a garden after a rainstorm, vibrant and a little muddy. Market stalls overflowed with spiced figs, sizzling kebabs, and the occasional stray cat that smelled like old laundry and adventure. Musicians strummed lutes while the chariot's low hum provided a bass line that made the townsfolk sway, as if they'd been hit by an invisible disco ball. The kingdom's prosperity was palpable. Even the stone fountains seemed to sparkle with a mischievous grin, as if the water itself were winking at the chariots. Yet irony lingered. While the chariots kept the night at bay, the town gossip proved just as relentless, spreading rumors faster than a viral meme. As the moon climbed higher, Aaron closed the scroll, feeling the weight of centuries settle on his shoulders like a warm, slightly damp blanket. He whispered a promise to the dream chariots, reminding them that neglecting a dream is like forgetting to feed a pet dragon, messy, dangerous, and terribly disappointing. The kingdom slept peacefully, the chariot's silhouettes flickering against the night sky, their breaths a soft, metallic sigh. He imagined future scholars reading his words, chuckling at his jokes, and perhaps adding their own pop culture twists, maybe a reference to a certain space-faring bounty hunter. With a satisfied grin, Aaron stepped into the moonlight, confident that the fragile bond between dreams and history would endure, even if the next generation decided to replace the chariots with hoverboards. When the sun's last golden breath slipped behind the cracked marble towers of Luminara, the city's alleys filled with the scent of damp stone and roasting figs. Aaron, a lanky dream weaver with hair that seemed to flutter like moth wings, prowled the market square, humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like a ringtone from 1,000 ages ago. Amidst a pile of cracked pottery, his fingertips brushed a brittle parchment, its edges curled like the scrolls of an ancient pizza box. The map glowed faintly, its ink shimmering like spilled moonlight on a midnight latte. He stared, heart thudding, as the ink spelled out a route to the fabled night vessel. Legend whispered that the night vessel rode the currents of sleep, slipping between moments the way a cat sneaks into a cardboard box, quiet, inevitable, slightly mischievous. The map promised a berth on that ghost ship, a passage that would ferry souls across centuries while they snored. A translucent spirit, restless as a teenager with unfinished video games, hovered nearby and tapped Aaron's shoulder, urging him with a voice that sounded like a busted speaker. "You've got one shot, kid, unless you prefer endless naps in the city's public baths," it crooned, the words echoing off the cobblestones. Aaron, half terrified and half thrilled, felt a spark of destiny flicker behind his left eye. Aaron sprinted to the old tavern, where a baker named Myra was busy kneading dough that smelled like sweet sunrise, and a lanky blacksmith called Joran hammered out lullabies on rusty swords. He begged them to join, promising a ride that would make even their grandmothers gasp in disbelief, and perhaps get a cameo on a future reality show. Myra blinked, smearing flour on her cheek, and said, "If it means I can finally bake croissants that don't turn into limp noodles, I'm in." Joran grunted, slapping a soot-blackened hand on his chest, declaring, "I've already dreamed of forging a sword that can cut through boring meetings." Their ragtag crew gathered, sharing bitter ale that tasted like damp socks, while the spirit giggled like a streaming app crashing at the climax. Night fell like a curtain of velvet, and the hidden harbor revealed itself only when the moonlight bounced off the water's surface, turning it into liquid glass sprinkled with firefly glitter. The air thickened with the metallic tang of old rope and the sour stink of forgotten fish guts, a reminder that even mythic docks have their garbage. Yes, even ancient ports have trash cans that smell like expired cheese. Shadows lingered at the pier's edge, hulking silhouettes that resembled overgrown potted plants, their eyes glinting like security cameras in a sci-fi movie. They hissed warning verses, "No one boards without paying the price of a night's true dream," a line that sounded suspiciously like a spoiler for a blockbuster saga. Undeterred, Aaron and his companions hefted their packs, feeling the cold bite of the wind as it whispered, "Welcome to the adventure, folks, no refunds." When the night vessel's hull creaked awake, it released a sigh that smelled of old books and freshly brewed espresso, a comforting paradox that steadied the crew's jittery nerves. The ship's lanterns flickered on, casting amber halos that danced like disco balls at a medieval rave, while the restless spirit slipped aboard, humming the theme from The Matrix in a minor key. Yaren clutched the map, feeling its parchment pulse like a living creature, and whispered, "Let's hope the tides are kinder than my mother's cooking." The vessel slipped into the sleep current, its timbers humming against the fabric of time, pulling the city's lanterns into a blur of amber and violet. As the harbor receded, the crew shared a nervous laugh, realizing that their journey would be as unpredictable as a cat video gone viral. The night vessel glided into the moonlit sea of slumber like a ghostly ferry on a tide of dreams, its hull humming with the soft sigh of distant constellations. A silvered mist curled around the railings, smelling faintly of wet parchment and stale coffee, an aroma that would make even a barista weep. Yaren stood at the bow, his boots splashing in a liquid that felt like melted midnight, while the crew whispered jokes about pirates who'd never learned to navigate by GPS. The stars above winked like mischievous audience members, and the vessel's lanterns flickered in rhythm with a distant, almost forgotten lullaby. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a gull cackled like a sarcastic commentator on a reality TV show. Without warning, the whispering current surged, their voices thin as cobwebs and as insistent as a toddler demanding candy. They tugged at the crew's thoughts, pulling loose fragments of childhood fears and the half-remembered lyrics of a 90s pop song that no one could quite place. Garen felt his own doubts slip like oily fish through his fingers, each one slipping back with a wet slap that echoed in his ears. The water smelled of brine and old laundry, a pungent reminder that even the most magical voyages have to deal with reality's dirty socks. The currents curled around the mast, humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like the theme from Doctor Who, urging everyone to face the past before the future could catch up. As the whispers grew louder, Aaron's mind flickered to the night he missed his sister's birthday, the taste of burnt toast still lingering on his tongue. The crew's laughter turned into a nervous cough when the currents brushed against their helmets, exposing the faint scent of rusted iron and old regret. One sailor, half asleep, muttered about a forgotten prom night, his voice cracking like a vinyl record stuck on a bad groove. The vessel rocked gently, as if the sea itself were shaking a shaking hand with each memory, forcing the crew to stare into the murky glass of their own histories. Even the ship's cat, perched on the wheel, flicked its tail in disdain as if to say, seriously, another emotional flashback. Then the first temporal storm cracked the sky, a jagged bolt of lightning that smelled of ozone and burnt popcorn, like a theater fire alarm gone rogue. The wind howled in a language older than any human tongue, dragging the vessel toward a whirlpool that glowed with the amber hue of a forgotten Victorian ballroom. Garen clutched the rail, feeling the cold metal bite into his palm like a disgruntled dentist, while the crew scrambled to secure the sails that now fluttered like nervous butterflies. The storm's roar mixed with the distant clatter of horse hooves and the clink of medieval armor, hinting that they were being pulled into an era where people still believed the earth was flat. A stray bolt struck the hull, leaving a scorch mark shaped like a smiley face, a cruel joke from the universe that even history has a sense of humor. With a collective grunt, the crew steadied themselves, their breaths fogging in the chill air like a dragon's sigh after a spicy taco. Aaron cracked a grin, shouting, "Hold on to your hats, folks, this is better than any Netflix binge." The ship shuddered, then steadied as the currents receded, leaving behind a faint scent of pine resin and fresh-baked bread, an odd comfort amid the chaos. Laughter erupted, half relief, half defiance, as the crew realized they had survived the first of many temporal tempests and still had time to argue over who stole the last piece of cheese. The night vessel resumed its glide, its lanterns now burning brighter, promising more whispered secrets and absurd adventures on the horizon. The enchanted night voyage slipped through a veil of starlight, its hull humming like a tired cat on a hot roof. Below, the sea of time rose in jagged silhouettes, crumbling towers, toppled arches, and streets choked with the dust of forgotten festivals. A cold wind sniffed of mildew and ancient incense, tugging at the sailors' cloaks and whispering riddles in a language older than Grandma's gossip. The crew tightened their grips, eyes glittering with the same mix of awe and dread that a kid feels spotting a dragon in a video game. Every creak of the timber seemed to echo the sighs of kingdoms that never got a sequel. First, a translucent figure drifted from the ruins of a Bronze Age citadel, its armor clanking like a rusty lunchbox. The ghostly wayfarer introduced himself as Ka Rock, a scribe who'd spent his afterlife cataloging the taste of goat cheese and the smell of battle smoke. He challenged the captain with a riddle about a river that runs backward when the moon is full, his voice as thin as parchment. The crew huddled, swapping guesses while the ship rocked, and finally shouted the answer, the Nile during the flood, which made Ka Rock dissolve into a puff of sand and a sigh of relief. The moment tasted like victory, mixed with the sour tang of old sweat. Just as the crew celebrated, a neon-glowing specter burst from the shattered walls of a forgotten 20th century arena, wielding an electric guitar that crackled like a thunderstorm in a tin can. He introduced himself with a swagger reminiscent of a rock star who missed his flight, shouting, "I'm the last riff of the Empire, baby." The ghost demanded a battle of wits. Solve his lyric-laden puzzle or be stuck in a loop of eternal encore. After a tense moment of head-banging contemplation, the navigator quoted the line, "All you need is love," and the specter vanished in a shower of glitter and the faint smell of cheap pizza. The crew laughed, half relieved, half wondering if they'd just survived a cosmic karaoke night. The ship then entered the heart of a marble courtyard where an ancient stone guardian, carved with eyes that glowed like traffic lights, blocked the path. Its voice rumbled like a subway train, demanding the travelers recount the name of the first king who ever lost a sock in a battle. The crew scrambled, the cook muttering about missing socks in his pantry, while the ship's cook's apprentice recalled a legend of King Balthazar the Barefoot. The guardian's stone jaw cracked open, releasing a gust of stale incense and the metallic tang of blood from centuries of sacrifice. With the riddle answered, the stone stepped aside, revealing a tunnel that smelled of damp earth and burnt pine, like a campfire that never got out. At last, the vessel emerged into the shimmering vortex of the temporal nexus, a whirl of colors that reminded everyone of a 90s rave mixed with a sunrise over a battlefield. The crew felt the ship's timbers pulse under their feet, as if the vessel itself were a living heart syncing with the universe's beat. With a final burst of wind that smelled like ozone and fresh rain on hot stone, they surged forward, leaving the echoing ruins behind. The captain raised a toast, joking that they'd just outlasted more ancient drama than a season of Game of Thrones. As the ship vanished into the night, the lingering scent of ancient incense and burnt pine clung to the air, a reminder that even in the farthest reaches of time, a good story always leaves a smell. The night vessel sliced through the ink-black heavens like a silver arrow, its hull humming with the lullabies of 1,000 sleepers. At the heart of the sky, the convergence swirled, a vortex of molten amber and violet, where threads of past, present, and future tangled like a cosmic yarn ball. Starlight fizzed against the ship's railings, painting the deck with freckles of gold that smelled faintly of ozone and burnt cinnamon. Aaron stood at the prow, eyes wide as saucers, feeling the pulse of centuries thrum beneath his boots. He whispered, "Hold on, folks, we're about to crash the ultimate after-party," and the crew chuckled despite the awestruck silence. From the vortex's depths emerged the Dream Guardian, a towering silhouette of shifting clouds and glittering eyes, as if 1,000 cats had merged into a single, disgruntled sphinx. Its voice rumbled like a subway train on a rainy night, demanding that no mortal footstep disturb the tapestry of destiny. The Guardian's breath carried the scent of wet stone and old laundry, a reminder that even mythic beings have to deal with mundane chores. Garen raised a trembling hand, half-heartedly quoting, "May the Force be with you," while the Guardians snorted a gust that scattered the ship's lanterns like startled fireflies. The crew's laughter died, replaced by a nervous shiver that felt like stepping on a cold, squishy floorboard in a haunted house. The battle of will and song erupted, each note a blade, each chant a shield. Aaron sang the ancient lullaby of the River of Dreams, his voice cracking like a vinyl record left in the sun, while the Guardian countered with a chorus of forgotten nightmares that tasted like rust and burnt toast. The deck vibrated with the clash, sending a spray of stardust that smelled oddly of fresh coffee and gasoline. Sparks of iridescent light ricocheted off the hull, painting the crew's faces with kaleidoscopic bruises. Even the stars above seemed to sway, as if the cosmos itself were trying to keep tempo with this absurd duet. Seeing the tide turn, Aaron gathered the travelers' murmurs, their whispered hopes, their midnight cravings for chocolate chip cookies, and wove them into a single, soaring anthem. He lifted his arms, and the collective dream surged like a tidal wave of warm blankets, wrapping the Guardian in a cocoon of comfort. The colossal entity's eyes softened, its stone-cold exterior melting into a puddle of lavender-scented fog. A sigh escaped its massive chest, releasing a gust that smelled like rain on a dusty road, and the vortex's frantic spin slowed to a lazy waltz. The crew, eyes wide with relief, exchanged glances that said, "We just survived a mythic therapist session," and burst into a half-triumphant, half-exasperated laugh. When the last echo of the Guardian's roar faded, the moon-lit hull of the night Voyager slipped like a silver fish back toward the waking world. Dawn stretched its amber fingers across the horizon, painting the docks of Luminara in a glow that could make a vampire squint. The crew felt the gentle roll of the sea underfoot, the salty spray tickling their noses as gulls cackled overhead like gossiping old men. Even the ship's ancient timbers seemed to sigh in relief, their creaks turning into a lazy lullaby. With the sunrise as their compass, they steered toward the bustling quay, where market stalls already smelled of fresh bread and burnt incense. Yaren was the first to stir, his eyes snapping open to a sky that glittered like a Hollywood premiere backdrop. The crew shuffled out, rubbing sleep from their eyes, and discovered that the night's trials had left invisible tattoos of starlight on their skin. Their limbs felt both heavy with exhaustion and light with a new kind of vigor, as if they'd just sprinted through a marathon and won a gold medal. The air was thick with the scent of frying fish and the distant clang of blacksmiths hammering, grounding them in the gritty reality of the harbor. Laughter bubbled up as they realized they could still hear the Guardian's distant snore, a reminder that even monsters need their beauty sleep. Together they gathered on the dock, swapping stories like merchants swapping silk, each tale weaving a thread into the fragile tapestry of time. They learned that past, present, and future are not separate chapters, but overlapping verses in a song that refuses to end on a single note. The voyage had taught them that a single choice can ripple like a stone tossed into a pond, stirring currents centuries later. Aaron whispered that the night's darkness was merely a curtain, and the sunrise a spotlight revealing the actor's true motives. With that insight, the crew felt the weight of history lift, replaced by a buoyant sense of responsibility to honor the moments that came before and those yet to arrive. Back in Luminara, the legend of the enchanted night voyage slipped into the mouths of mothers soothing their babes, humming like a pop song chorus stuck in a toddler's head. The lullabies carried the scent of sea spray, the the crackle of the guardian's chains, and the occasional off-key warble that sounded suspiciously like a cat stuck in a karaoke bar. Travelers who heard the tune swore they could taste moonlight on their tongues, a flavor as elusive as a unicorn's breakfast cereal. The humor of it all, how a terrifying beast could become bedtime background noise, made the old sailors grin, shaking their heads at the irony. Even the town's gruffest fisherman admitted that the story made his nightly catch feel like a heroic quest for the perfect sardine. As the sun climbed higher, the dockside market erupted in a cacophony of haggling, clanging pots, and the occasional squeal of a child chasing a runaway rooster. The crew, now seasoned by the night's impossible journey, walked among the crowd with a swagger that suggested they'd just survived a season of Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, plus a lot more sand. Their boots squelched in the muck, reminding them that glory often smells like fermented kelp and rusted iron. Yet every glance at the sunrise-kissed towers of Luminara reminded them that the world kept turning, and their story was now a thread in its endless tapestry. With a final toast of spiced tea, they pledged to keep the night's lessons alive, knowing that tomorrow's lullabies would carry the echo of their enchanted voyage.